There are some messages that pastors don't like to preach at their own church. One being tithing. Most pastors really don't like to talk about finances. And the other one is Hebrews chapter 13, verse number 17. And the Bible says here, "Obey them that have the rule over you and submit yourselves, for they watch for your souls, as they that must give account, that they may do it with joy and not with grief, for that is unprofitable for you." And so the title for my message that I was going to preach up there was How to Pastor Your Pastor. As someone who has now pastored here for 18 years, I get a lot of calls from pastors who have maybe not been at it quite as long. Larry kind of talked about when he was here, about that was kind of our friendship, how it started. Him kind of coming to me and talking to me about just some things he was going through in the ministry at his church there. So the longer I'm pastoring, especially the longer you pastor in the same location, I don't always think about it this way because it's just the way it's been. But then you realize we're coming up on 18 years here pretty soon. That's, according to the national averages, that's a long time in a church. The national average right now for pastors is about 6 to 7 years. And in some churches, people complain and say, well, you know, pastors, they just move on. But some churches, I'm thinking, if I had to pastor that group, I'd probably want to move on too, just if we're being very honest about that. Some places are very difficult to pastor, and this has not been one of them. Not very many churches can say after your 50th anniversary, you've only had 2 pastors, and that says a lot about the church, not just about myself or Pastor Sheffield. It says a lot about the church that people would want to stay here that long. And so I don't preach this message because I feel like there's an issue that needs to be corrected, which is the only reason I decided to go ahead and preach it. It'd be way more awkward if I felt like I had to correct something that was happening here. But you know, one of the main questions I get asked all the time by pastors is, how in the world can you pastor a church, have 6 kids, 5 that were at home for a while, and also be the principal of a school? And my number one answer is always, for one, good staff at the school, but also great people in the church. I don't think I could have even though I was younger and had more energy, I couldn't have done that in the first 10 years. But because of the makeup of our church over the years and the way, not just numerically growing, but people growing in the church, been able to do that and knowing that things are still getting done and knowing that people are doing other things and helping out. Several years ago, after Pastor Sheffield died, I realized something I should have realized before then, but wasn't even cognizant of it just because it was a natural overflow from him being my pastor for so long, was that he was still my pastor. He would call me pastor, but he was still my pastor in a very real way, in that every single week he didn't need to be here. He led singing for Sunday school a lot of times, and that was sometimes it, but he would come and pick those songs at like 8:30, 8:45. But he'd be here for about an hour, really, before anybody else was here, and we would talk, and he would see how things were going, and we would chat about things in the church, and I'd get advice from him, and we would just kind of chat. And I didn't realize how valuable that was until it wasn't there anymore. And so I went to Brother Grash, and I said, I need a pastor. After Pastor Sheffield passed away, I said, I need somebody. We talk about accountability. I said, I'm not necessarily asking for somebody to make sure I'm doing everything all right, but just make sure I'm doing all right. Somebody that, we had those Sunday conversations where he was checking in on me, different things. And then Brother Grash, with his health, he's had to move over there to Harvest. And, I've been blessed to have pastor friends that I can rely on and things like that. But I've come to realize over the years that as a pastor, the pastor pastors the church, but the church also pastors the pastor and helps us in our walk and helps to challenge us, encourage us, to sharpen us, and all those things, which is really what the pastor's striving to do with the church, is to encourage them, to challenge them, to sharpen them in their walk with the Lord. That's what we're trying to do. And so I want to start by just saying just how grateful that Don and I are for the church. I know a lot of pastors who are just every week under a ton of discouragement. Brother John, you've not been necessarily on the road like you normally are in furlough, but I'm sure you've encountered some of that even from some pastors who, it's a struggle. They go, the people aren't really, it's just kind of, we hear this a lot. Ever since COVID, you hear that a lot. Ever since COVID, everything's changed. Everything's changed. Every church has changed. It's a different world than we lived in before. We got people that are just angry all the time, and we got, it's just been a very difficult situation. And a lot of guys are under constant criticism and discouragement. And I believe that God has blessed our church with, a very loving group of people who encourages and supports us. And me and Don have been very thankful for that over the years. And so tonight, it's not about correcting a problem. It's really about celebrating what God has done, but also encouraging us to continue to follow Scripture and being the kind of church that really God has called us to be. And so Hebrews chapter 13 here that we read, it reminds us of the relationship between a shepherd and sheep, a relationship that flourishes when both are walking together in the will of God. And obviously as a pastor, we understand that Christ is the chief shepherd and that we are an under shepherd, and he is the authority. We're just doing what he has asked us to do. But there is that responsibility that comes with that. And so I wanted to give you a couple things that you can do to help, to pastor the pastor. And so, like I said, I didn't mean this for you, but you're in the crosshairs now because Larry didn't have Sunday afternoon services. So Hebrews chapter 13 says, "They watch for your souls as they that must give account." So first thing is to recognize the weight of the calling. If you ask most people on the street, what does a pastor do? What do they say? Well, they preach. Preaching is the benefit of ministry. It's a blessing of ministry. But preaching is a very small part of ministry. Preaching's the fun stuff. If all pastoring was preaching, more people would sign up to do it. That, like I said, that's a joyful thing to be able to do. But he says there that we're called not only to preach, but to watch for your souls. Preaching, as I said, is a reward for ministry. It means bearing responsibility for guiding and warning and praying and protecting. What I have found over the years, there are people out there. Ryan Hayden, pastor in Mattoon, Illinois, he said one time, he said, "I've come to learn that some people, it's like going to the doctor. Some people don't want a doctor who will cut on them and perform surgery. They just want a hospice worker who will help them die in a comfortable, peaceful surrounding. They don't want somebody who will tell them the truth and maybe say things that might even bruise them a little bit, because they just want somebody to make them feel good in that process." But that's not the call to ministry. Paul carried the care of all the churches daily, he said in 2 Corinthians chapter 11. It was a constant burden that Paul felt. And as a church, you have helped lighten that load through faithfulness, through encouragement, and that makes it to where, when we talk, I hear some guys talk about, pastoring's so hard, and I'm like, it has hard moments, but I love it. I think, I've told y'all before, a certain preacher that would text me every Monday, and he texted out probably 400 preachers every week. So it wasn't just he was saying this to me, but he would send this text out to us, and he'd say, "I know it's Monday. Don't give up. Maybe nobody listened to your message yesterday. Maybe everybody discouraged you, but don't give up." And I was just like, yeah, we had a pretty good day. I was pretty excited. When am I supposed to start getting just ready to give up all the time? I'm enjoying this moment. And it's been because I have felt like in our church, we do a pastor appreciation thing every October. I told our deacons a few years ago, we can dial that back. I feel greatly appreciated by you as a church. We don't have to do all those things. I just like to have a dinner every October where we can sit and fellowship together as a church family. Because the appreciation is not shown just in October. It's shown all throughout the year, and understanding the weight of that ministry, of that burden of watching for the souls. And so continue remembering that it's more than a job, it's divine stewardship, and it's by prayer and support that church people can help to make that load a little lighter. Then secondly, remember that your pastor, that would be me since I am preaching it here, I was going to say to Brother Larry, is in the middle of his own sanctification. There's this mindset that people have of pastors that they've gotten where they're supposed to be, and now it's just their job to bring everybody else along. That's not what it is. Paul said, "I have not yet attained. I am in the middle of my walk as well." There are some of you that have been saved longer than I have. If being a pastor was just about how far along you are in your sanctification, then we've been going about this all wrong. But we are all in that process. There are things that I preached before I had kids that, man, I realize now a little bit different. There are things that I've looked at over the years. It's amazing how much I knew about pastoring before I became a pastor. I was a genius about pastoring until day one of becoming a pastor. Same thing with being a husband. Man, we were engaged. I was like, why do these people have struggles? And people talking about, people go, oh, through the ups and downs of marriage. We're just going to make it all ups. It's all great. No, then you realize life happens, and you learn some lessons there. And pastors are not finished products. We're still being sanctified. We're still learning. We're still growing. And like Apollos in Acts chapter 18, verse 26, even preachers sometimes, when Ananias and Sapphira came to him and talked to him, there are some that need to have others maybe explain things to them, even from the ways of God, more perfectly. Because Apollos didn't understand everything. It wasn't rebellion for them to come to him and explain those things to him. God often uses church members' encouragement, testimonies, and even sometimes gentle instruction and reproof when necessary to help the pastor grow. I can look back over the years and think of many examples of people that did not walk up to me and say, you know, that sermon was awesome. Instead, I got a phone call on Monday or Tuesday that said, you know, I struggled with this, understanding what you meant by this, and it helped me to realize I either didn't say enough, I didn't say it correctly, or I said too much. And they've helped me in those things, and they've helped me to realize sometimes that maybe I didn't look at a verse correctly in the context of what was in the chapter, and don't ever hesitate to say, if there's something that is being taught from the pulpit or, you know, here in the church that you'd say, I just want to make sure we're lining that up with Scripture. That's not rebellion to question that and to say, let's make sure that we're right on those things. And so the pastor is not above sanctification. He's actually right in the middle of it. He's following the same shepherd, and we're all just trying to sharpen each other and go that same direction. The third thing you need to do is pray for your pastor and his family. I remember saying this to Brother Sheffield years ago, that we had a situation where a pastor friend that we knew went through a divorce. And we were praying for them to try to work it out. And I remember looking at Pastor Sheffield and saying, you know, you were my pastor since I was 9 years old. I was at that time now in my 30s. And I said, I don't think I ever one time prayed for your marriage. It never dawned on me that I needed to. I said, it just, in my mind growing up as a kid, you wouldn't need help in that area. You wouldn't need that. So I prayed for other things. I prayed for your health. I prayed for you as you prepared sermons. I prayed for you with your children when there were maybe times that requests were given for those things. I prayed for all kinds of things, but not one time. And then I said, and that guy that's going through a divorce right now, I never one time prayed for his marriage. I prayed for his ministry. I prayed for his safety. I prayed for all those things. And I said, I need to apologize for not praying correctly for you. And he said, none of us do. He said, I never prayed for Brother James' marriage either. He said, until you're in the middle of it, you don't understand everything. So while you'll never probably be able to pray for every request that I have and that I need, and that I can't necessarily always stand in the pulpit and just bear it all and say, this is everything I need prayer for. But you can make lifting up your pastor a consistent thing that you strive to do. And I believe the Lord kind of takes that and understands that we don't know all the details. And many times I pray for them and I say, Lord, and all those other areas of their life that I don't really know all the details of, Lord, you know. But our pastor's greatest need is prayer. Brother Larry said when he was taking up the offering, he said, I know they had a lot of visitors Sunday. And he said, I know visitors, they come in, you're in church. He goes, I even hate taking up the offering because I know people sometimes think pastors, all they want is the money. And I stood up and I said, and Brother Larry was a little nervous when I first said this because they could use the offerings. I said, Brother Larry does not need your money. Faith Baptist Church does not need your money, but the people they owe, they need your money. So given the offering, but yes, there was offerings that were needed there. But every pastor's greatest need is prayer. Yes, they need it for boldness in preaching, for purity in their life, for protection from spiritual warfare, for God to guide them in their family, and for them to follow him. Because our family bears a huge weight of ministry. While I can say, I've seen it done pretty badly on this, our kids felt an extra weight in ministry, but you guys have never, most of that was, we felt that ourselves. I never had a situation where people were like, well, as the pastor's kids, they should, but we feel that, and our kids feel that sometimes. There's an extra weight of that ministry that they know that if they and another kid in the youth group are doing something dumb, which newsflash, kids do dumb things, but if they know if we do it, I'm probably, first of all, not only am I it's gonna look bad in front of the church, but then Dad's gonna be real upset with me. And and some kids maybe don't even have parents at the church. But they know, man, I'm going to feel that weight. And so they bear the weight of ministry. So pray for their encouragement. Pray for their protection. And then don't just pray for their encouragement, be an encouragement to them. Many of you have told us that you're praying over the last year. We had some situations, some of you told us you were praying. And that carried us many times through some of the struggles that we knew that you guys were praying for us in those things. So keep doing that. Because of being in a different place, I was going to go a little bit more into detail with this last week, but you guys your all's prayers have been such a huge encouragement, and not just your prayers, but you just sending texts, hey, I'm praying for you. There was one time we were going through a situation, and it wasn't anybody here in this church, but we were struggling with something, and we got a text from somebody who visited the church one time, who lived in Arkansas, and they didn't know what was going on. They had no way of knowing. And we got a text from them, hey, I just want to let you know, for some reason, I couldn't quit thinking about you guys today, and so I prayed for you. They didn't know what we were going through that day, but I can tell you that was a huge encouragement. So pray for your pastor, pray for each other, and when the Lord nudges you on something like that, don't hesitate to share it with them. You don't have to post it on Facebook to everybody. Hey, everybody, just so you know, I just prayed for this person. You can just contact them. It'll be a huge encouragement to them to know you're praying for them. Which goes to the next point then of simply encouraging and strengthening the work. 1 Thessalonians chapter 5, turn over there real quick. 1 Thessalonians chapter 5. Chapter 5, down in verse number 12. We beseech you, brethren, to know them which labor among you and are over you in the Lord, and admonish you, and to esteem them very highly in love for their work's sake, and be at peace among yourselves. You're talking about the work's sake. Man, encouragement is like extra fuel for ministry. Sometimes it's a kind word, a handshake, an amen every once in a while. That's awesome. Just an amen every once in a while, but especially on awkward messages like this. Sometimes people mean it as compliments, and if you overanalyze it, you'll go, that was not a compliment. But I just usually say, they probably didn't mean it that way. They meant it as a compliment. I always remember Miss Hubbard. She came up to me one time. I preached. I tried to pour everything I had in that message, and she goes, that was a nice little talk today. And I was like, that is not what I was going for. Nice little talk today. But I choose to believe Miss Hubbard wasn't trying to be mean. She was just saying that was good today. And so for the longest time, I just cut it off at that was good talk. That's all I heard. Good talk. At least got that much. Because I believe that's what she meant. But sometimes just that little bit of encouragement is like an extra fuel to keep going. They're just small but powerful ways to encourage somebody. And this would go for anyone doing any work in the ministry. In Exodus chapter 17, we all know the story, and many times when pastors preach this message out of Hebrews chapter 13, they go to the story of Moses getting tired. And every time his arms would fall, they would begin to lose the battle. And every time his arms were up in the air, they would begin to win the battle. So Aaron and Hur come and they hold up his arms during the battle. And sometimes that encouragement, that's what you've done for us in ministry, is to just encourage us, which allows us to continue to. It's important for pastors to always remember that we do everything we do for the audience of one. But that doesn't mean encouragement doesn't help. While we would say, if I know I'm doing what the Lord would have me to do, though none would join me, still I'll follow. That is true. But man, it's nice to know others have joined you. And it's nice to know others are with you. Your faithfulness and attendance and service and loving one another helps those in ministry continue on. So keep being encouragers. Every word of kindness, every act of service, every display of unity is like lifting up the pastor's hand in battle. We've got two more. Guard the unity of the church. I used this title basically of a point in a message I gave to our staff at the school about guarding unity. And that's important for us, is unity doesn't happen by accident. And typically, when unified, there's usually going to be some attempts to ununify some things. The devil's going to try to find a chink in the armor there. And it talks about them doing this labor with joy and not with grief. And division weakens the church, which always, again, if we're talking about encouraging the pastor, is one way to discourage them. Unity brings joy and strength. Psalm 133 says, "Behold how good and how pleasant it is for the brethren to dwell together in unity." This church, I believe, has been one that has always been one that has displayed unity. There's all these stories that you hear. I've heard all these stories about churches splitting over the color of the carpet and all these different things. And I told somebody, I said, I can count on one hand how many times we've had a vote that wasn't unanimous. And almost every time, it was like even the one or two people that voted one way told me at the end of the day, I'm fine with whatever we decide. This is just my vote, and if it goes against me, oh well, then it was the group. I'm with it. And that's what unity is. Not, I got to have my way or I'm leaving. We talk a lot about being able to share ideas and different things, and a lot of people like to share ideas that they just can't handle when their idea doesn't get used. And that's been a joy here. I always tease about in our church years ago, some of you know this, years ago we were Grace Baptist Church of New Albany. And I wasn't there when this change happened. I didn't realize it at the time, I came right after the church started here at this location. So when they moved here, we had Grace Brethren Church, and then we had Graceland Baptist Church right down the road, and then we were Grace Baptist Church. So obviously you could see why they think maybe we should change the name. It gets kind of confusing over here. It's Grace Alley right over here. But, they decide we're going to change the name. So they do a vote, and they narrowed down. I don't know exactly how the entire process went. Brother Sheffield told me a little bit about this. But he said basically some nominated some names. They narrowed it down to two names. And it was Calvary Road Baptist Church or Calvary Baptist Church. Now, I'm just going to be honest. If I was here in 1986, I would have voted for Calvary Baptist Church. Because people get very confused when you say Calvary Road on St. Joseph Road. So then they're like, I thought the name of the church's road was Calvary. They get very confused. And we get tons of stuff mailed to us anyway that just say Calvary Baptist Church, because people just assume that's the name. Well, I was talking to Brother Sheffield about it. He said what's weird is almost everybody that voted for Calvary Road Baptist Church were gone in just a few years. And most of the ones that had voted for Calvary Baptist Church had stayed around. But, he said, but every one of them said, but whatever the vote is, that's the group. We're in this together. We're not going to cause a stink about it. It's just we're going to vote, and that's what it is. Unity doesn't mean we all think alike, but it means we do all get on the same page and go in the same direction. Brother Frost used a great example during our teacher orientation about tug of war. That he said, we'd get off the bus with these kids to go to camp, and these same kids have been fighting all the way to camp. When they drop the flag and you start tug of war, now you're all on the same team, you're best friends, you're pulling in the same direction, and when you win, you're high-fiving the same kid that you were trying to pick on 20 minutes ago. But it's realizing there's a greater cause. Now, obviously, tug of war is not that great of a cause. But the cause of Christ is a greater cause. And we say there's a greater cause. We don't have to all think alike. We're brothers and sisters in Christ. We don't have to be twins. We don't have to see everything the same way. It's okay. But we stay in unity. And then lastly, what to do when your pastor messes up. And I don't mean disqualifies himself. At that point, it's different. It's time to make a change. But your pastor, this guy, will stick his foot in his mouth sometimes, on the daily sometimes. He will, I told somebody, I said, if you talk 3 times a week in front of people, you will make mistakes. You will say things that you go, should have kept that one right inside of here. It's just going to happen. Unfortunately, you got a human pastor. You didn't get an AI pastor that you can just say, let's just churn it out. It'll say it exactly right every time, and we'll move on. But in Galatians chapter 6, verse 1, it says, Brethren, if a man be overtaken in a fault, ye which are spiritual, restore such an one in the spirit of meekness. Pastors will sometimes say stupid, clumsy things. They will sometimes miss something. Sometimes they will overlook something. Sometimes they'll make a decision or take a stand that you don't understand. And sometimes they will fall short of what you think they should do. And you may be right about what they should do, and they will fall short of that. When that happens, how do you respond? Well, not with bitterness or running away, but with grace. Over the years, this is a conversation you can almost have with any pastor. I just had a conversation with someone in ministry today who said, I've seen this 1,000 times. Pour your heart into somebody. Make one mistake, they're gone. You say one thing wrong, every pastor knows he is one mistake away from losing almost any family in his church. That's how it happens. Ms. Sheffield, would you say you saw that over the years? One time. You can be at their hospital bed. You can be at funeral homes. You can be at weddings. You can go out of your way to do everything you can to help them. You say something stupid in the pulpit one time or not in the pulpit, and they're done. So one pastor told me recently, he said, you know how I can always tell when someone's still mad at me, when they've said they forgive me? He said, if I overhear them talking about me, and when they say, well, the pastor said this, when they say what you said, and they try to mimic your voice, and it doesn't sound anything like your voice. So when the pastor, he said, well, we better do this. They're probably going to be gone soon because they haven't forgiven me. He said, many times they may be right, and I messed up, and I asked them to forgive me, and they said they forgave me. But when they start doing this, they're done because they have not learned to forgive. So when that happens, some of you are going, uh-oh, is my wife about to leave? Because you're like, my wife does that to me all the time when she says, well, you said you were going to do this. Well, sorry, guys. They're bound to you. Church members are not bound, okay? So they didn't take a till death do us part pledge when they joined the church, but they did when they got married to you. So hopefully you're safe on that. But still, wives, don't do that. And husbands, don't do that either. But Jesus taught us in Matthew chapter 18, verse 15, that if your brother offends you, go to them humbly, privately, directly. That would include your pastor. Confront them. And if they acknowledge that and ask for forgiveness of that, you've gained a brother. But also, if they, you can only do your part. If they won't acknowledge that and they say, guess what, I'm going to keep doing that. A couple years ago, I had a situation with someone I had to confront who we took our kids to hear them preach. And they said something that I did not appreciate. And so I confronted them. It was somebody I respected greatly. And I thought, okay, I'm going to confront him. Hopefully he'll realize, yeah, maybe I shouldn't say that. But he pretty much let me know at the end of it, well, people just get offended a lot easier nowadays, so I got to keep that in mind. I'm like, no, I don't think this was getting offended too easy. I think you said something you really shouldn't say. And when at the end of the conversation, he kind of let me know, I'll just keep saying it. Then I decided, then I can't continue to bring our kids to hear this preacher, as much as I respected them up until that day. And so sometimes you have to do that. But if a pastor is truly in sin and there's moral issues, then yes, more things need to happen. The deacons need to get involved. We need to confront that and remove that person. And the Bible does provide accountability for that. But if they've just simply messed up, well, then guess what? Join the club. I talked to a pastor a couple years ago. He pastored over 50 years at the church he's at. Man, that's hard to find. And he had done something, said something, and people were upset with him. And somebody called me about it and said, what do you think I should do? And I said, well, how many times do you think you've probably said something dumb or insensitive or rude in front of your pastor? Oh, many times. Well, has your pastor ever quit and said, you can't come back to my church anymore because you offended me last week? I said, then maybe you could just give him that same grace next week. The best way to handle hurt, though, is by prayer and patience and biblical conversations. And a church that forgives and restores is a church that reflects Christ. So when shepherd and sheep walk together in love and prayer and encouragement and forgiveness, the pastor is strengthened, the people are fed, the church is unified, and Christ is glorified. And that's what we're trying to get to. We're trying to build up each part of that so we can get to the part where Christ is glorified. And that happens best when his people walk in unity. You've been a huge blessing to us, and as I said, this message was not at all meant to be a rebuke. It's thinking about our church, it's more of a celebration. I was struggling with how to write this message because I wasn't going to plan on preaching it to you, and I didn't want to make it sound like, well, hey, sorry, my church is awesome, and maybe not everybody else gets that. But it was hard to write that because I don't have those complaints about our church. And I hope that 15, 20 years from now, I can preach that same message and say, yep, still continuing that trend. Keep encouraging, keep praying, keep forgiving, keep walking with me and my family in our sanctification while you're striving in your own sanctification. So we commit to pastoring each other in love. I'll keep doing what I feel like God would lead me to do to shepherd us as a church and to lead us in that direction, but I'm not here to lord over anybody, but to help you and encourage you in your walk with the Lord and strengthen you while you strengthen us. And together we can follow the chief shepherd in the walk that he has called us to do. There is no hierarchy of believers. We're all sheep. Some of us have been given certain responsibilities, but we're all sheep. And we're all following the same shepherd. All right, let's stop there, and we'll take some prayer requests tonight. And if you